Canadians been through a lot. They work hard. We see that. We've been able to get through the past couple of years. Everyone had to tighten their belts a little bit. And now we're going to be able to give a tax break for all Canadians.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new measures today to help Canadians with the cost of living. That includes a 2-month GST holiday on a number of items like groceries, restaurant meals, beer and wine, children's clothing, car seats, diapers, toys, books, and Christmas trees. That starts on December 14th, and the second measure is a check for $250 that will be sent this spring to 18.7 million working Canadians who earn $150,000 or less. The NDP plans to support the legislation, but Conservatives say it's an act of desperation.
And today what we have is a 2-month temporary tax trick that will not make up for the permanent quadrupling carbon tax on heat, housing, food, and fuel, and all to save Justin's job and Jagmeet's pension.
We fought for this. We said this is important, and the Liberals informed us that they had caved to our demands. But they included a Liberal letdown. This is temporary, and it doesn't include the monthly bills. But we know that middle-class families need a break, so we're going to work as hard as possible to get this done as quickly as possible.
Joining me now is Terry Beech, the Minister of Citizen Services. Minister Beech, welcome to the show. Forgive my failing voice. I've been dealing with a cold all week. It's good to see you.
It's so funny that you say that, David. Thanks for having me, but I actually lost my voice for 4 days, so I'm glad to have it back to be with you today.
Okay, well, look, thanks for being here. And look, I'm old enough to remember the 2021 election when Aaron O'Toole ran on a GST holiday for the holidays, and the Liberals said it wasn't a good idea because it would cost the taxpayers too much money. The government needed the revenue. So why was it unaffordable then, but it's affordable now?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, we're in a very different fiscal framework than we were back then. I mean, the main headline here is this is a more than $6 billion tax cut that is going to benefit all Canadians, yes, but in a very targeted way, with almost 75% of it actually going directly to middle-class working Canadians at a time that they could really use it.
Targeted, you call it targeted. And the $6 billion is the GST holiday for December and January to mid-February, but also the $250 rebate checks that are going to go to people after April 1. That's up to $150.
That's right, and it's specifically the federal contribution. So where I am in British Columbia, it's 5% for the GST, but where you are in Ontario, it's 13%. I'm hoping that premiers will also sign on. So if David Eby, Premier Eby in British Columbia signed on, then we could be looking at 12%.
Right. Okay. But I want to talk about the $250 that you're giving to 18.7 million Canadians with incomes of up to $150,000. You say it's targeted, but that's a pretty high income threshold to be giving a rebate to in the Canadian context, as the median salary is much lower than that. Why not target lower income people more aggressively than going as high as $150,000?
Well, I think that's a fair question, David, honestly. If you look at what we've done for affordability measures, we've been looking at different ways to make life more affordable as Canadians have been dealing with that. When I go door knocking, it's the number one thing that I get asked about. And while we've rolled out programs like dental care, like child care, like pharmacare, the Canada Child Benefit, et cetera, $10 a day childcare, what I hear on the door a lot is people are saying, well, wait a second, some of those programs sound good and I support them, but they don't necessarily benefit me directly. And I'm here working every day. And you know what? Things are difficult for me too. So I think the income test is to make sure that, we're not sending this money to millionaires, but specifically it is a wonderful way to target working class, middle class Canadians. And I fully expect, despite the criticism that I heard at the start of the show, that I actually think all parties will support it, because I think it's a good measure at a good time when we're in a fiscal situation that we can actually support this.
Well, when the Conservatives vote for your legislation, I'll bring you back to gloat about that, because I think the political dynamic right now makes that unlikely. But this is aimed only at people with employment income in 2023. So seniors who might have retirement income, they might have investment income, but not necessarily employment income, they're not going to get this money. They're a group of people that we know are struggling a lot with the cost of living. If you're unemployed or underemployed, or on income support, you're not going to get this money. So why explain the decision to exclude those groups from this particular bit of assistance?
Well, I think one of my first jobs as Minister of Citizen Services was actually to roll out dental care. And as you saw, we did that in phases. And to date, it's mostly helped out seniors. There's been 1 million people that have actually seen the dentist. That's a savings of $700. There's been specific savings for families around the Canada Child Benefit, which could be up to $500 or more a month. $10 a day childcare. If you talk to a family that's accessed that is life-changing stuff. But as I already said, when I go door knocking and I'm talking to people that are working every day, trying to pay the rent, trying to pay the mortgage, they're the ones that can really use the help. And before I was a minister, I was actually in finance for 2 years, and we spent a lot of time really making sure that we were staying within the fiscal framework so that we could have inflation come down, so that we could have interest rates come down, and they have. They've come down faster than in any of our comparative countries. And that puts us in a position with the lowest deficit in the G7 to be able to go, hey, we can actually provide more relief directly to Canadians. And this is an opportunity to give a more than $6 billion tax relief measure for Canadians that will hit them right around the holidays at a time when we want to see restaurants continue to thrive, small businesses continue to thrive. So it's not just those individuals that are going to benefit, it's our local communities and main streets across our country as well.
Okay, you talk about the fiscal situation and the improvement, but on budget day, Chrystia Freeland was very clear. She wanted to keep the deficit to $40 billion or below. She talked about fiscal anchors of a declining debt to GDP ratio over time and a debt to GDP, a deficit of no more than 1% of GDP starting in a couple of years. The parliamentary budget officer said last month, you've already probably blown through that, looking at a deficit of $45, $46, $47 billion, and that was before the spending announced today. So are we looking at a deficit of $50+ billion now, after it being the bottom line that $40 billion was as far as you go, as back as the budget this year?
Well, I'm very happy to share with you that the debt to GDP ratio with this measure will continue to go down. Obviously, there's a fall economic statement that's coming, and there's things that are added and there's things that are taken away. So all those things have to be calculated. I mean, I sit on Treasury board, so I was there for the first round of the $15 billion cost cutting exercise. There's a second round of that coming up. So it is crucial that we stay within our fiscal framework, but we also need to put it inside context. You mentioned the 1% number. Another number that is 1% or getting close to that is the total share of our interest payments compared to our GDP, whereas in the United States, it's 5%. Sure. In Canada, in the 90s, it was 6%. So we are in this good fiscal position, but the issue is the average Canadian, a lot of Canadians, despite having this good macroeconomic context, haven't felt it in their pocketbook. This is something that they're going to feel directly.
Okay, but we went through a lot of numbers there, but not the deficit number. Are you going to blow past the $40 billion ceiling that Chrystia Freeland said on budget day was her imperative to stay within, because it would send a clear signal to the Bank of Canada, a clear signal to the credit rating agencies, and a clear signal to the world that Canada could set a fiscal track and stick with it? It looks, if you blow through that, you're undoing that promise. So where are we?
So it's a great question. As I said, I care very much about our fiscal guardrails. So it's important that we stick to them. I don't have insight to the fall economic statement, but we're all going to have that insight relatively soon. What I will say is that Canadians that are watching this can rest assured that Canada has the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. When we go out and talk to other countries that are also dealing with increasing house costs, when they're also dealing with, inflation, they ask us, like, how did we get it down faster than they did? And how were we able to do that while rolling out affordability measures like childcare, like pharmacare, like dental care? These are groundbreaking programs. Well, now we've got one more to add, a $6 billion plus tax cut. And if the provinces come along with us, it'll actually be significantly more than that.
I get that maybe we have the smallest deficit in the G7, but we're also the smallest economy and the smallest country in the G7, right? So, but there was a promise made by the Deputy Prime Minister and the Finance Minister on Budget Day to stick to $40 billion. Will you meet that promise? Have you found enough savings in the other Treasury Board measures or through different windfalls and economic revenues that you weren't expecting to offset all of this? And also, would the checks that are going to come in April, would that be on next year's budget? Because that's in the new fiscal year. How does that work?
So I believe that the checks will be in the next one, but don't quote me on that. So like we'll have to double check that. But before I was minister, I was parliamentary secretary in finance. And even when I was parliamentary secretary in finance, I wouldn't be able to share with you what's in the fall economic statement or not. Now that I'm a minister worried about making, getting dental care delivered, making the cost of government, make government more efficient, I don't have direct insight to exactly where the fall economic statement is. But what I can tell you is when I talk to the finance minister and when we talk about the cabinet around the cabinet table, we take those fiscal anchors very seriously because it is those fiscal anchors that allowed us to get inflation to within the target rate. It's been there for all of 2024. It's what allowed us to get inflation lower than wages, which it has been now for 21 months straight. Not everything is perfectly rosy, but if you look at it from a macroeconomic perspective, compared to other nations that are comparable to Canada, we're doing very well. But Canadians are saying we're not necessarily feeling that. I mean, in order to feel the benefit of an interest rate cut, you have to go finance or refinance something. And that doesn't necessarily happen automatically. But that $250 check or $500 if you're in a dual income household, and that GST cut or HST cut, you're going to feel that immediately. And that's a way that we can take this good fiscal economic position that we put ourselves in, the Canadians have suffered for 2 years in order to be in this position, and provide those benefits directly.
When Doug Ford did this, the Ontario Liberals called it a gimmick. You're just sending a check to people and adding to the deficit when there are programming needs and economic uncertainty and the debt has grown dramatically during the pandemic. The Ontario Liberals called it a gimmick. What makes this not a gimmick?
Well, I would say, the parliamentary budget officer came out with a report where they did an analysis of the sustainability of the finances for the federal government and all the provinces. And the federal government was shown to be sustainable with $46 billion of fiscal room. That means you could invest that in programs, or you could use that to cut taxes. And there are things that we're investing in, like meeting our 2% of GDP NATO requirements, et cetera. But I think the average Canadian, if you ask them, and I ask them all the time, I do more door knocking than almost any other member of parliament. When they hear that, I think they're asking, why can't we have some of that money back? And why can't I use some of that money to help my situation and help my family? And that's what we're doing today.
Okay, one last question. You've got to get this through the House of Commons. You haven't been able to get anything through the House of Commons. Will you just bite the bullet and comply with the demands of the privilege motion to get this through and to get your supplementary estimates through? Or are you going to try to find a path through with the NDP's help? Because I know they've suggested they will help you with it, but the Conservatives in the bloc may have other ideas. How do you make this work?
Yeah, I mean, I have great faith in our House leadership. And I think that when we debate this in the House, we talk to other parliamentarians, I think that this is a measure that meets the moment. And I know you joked about it earlier that I'll have a chance to come back if we can get the Conservatives to vote for this. But I actually think that there's going to be a lot of consensus that this is actually a good measure by members of all parties in the House. So I think we'll find a path through. With regards to the privilege motion, the message that I always tell my constituents is, listen, we have a leader of the opposition, the Conservatives, that has been an obstructionist by nature. I mean, he hasn't studied a budget in a couple of years. He used to be my critic on the Finance Committee. So this is just another way that he's looking to obstruct. I expect that we'll find a way to get this through, but the business of government is continuing. We're still rolling out dental care, right? We're still rolling out the disability benefits.
Well, not if supply doesn't get through. I mean, if you don't get estimates through, it's going to be, you can't pay for dental care if you don't get the money for it, right? Like there's going to be some challenges there. So you need some cooperation.
If the Conservatives want to stop a $6 billion tax cut from reaching 18.7 million Canadians and a GST holiday that's going to benefit all Canadians across the country, or that's something they're going to have to explain to their constituents?
I saw, just as a last question, in my home province of Newfoundland and Labrador, that the Premier there, the Liberal Premier, Andrew Furey, says they're going to match this and do the holiday there to take that off other goods. What about other provinces? I know you say you're waiting to hear from other provinces, but were you given any, did they get any kind of a heads up that this was coming and suggested that they may want to blend their policy with this one?
The Prime Minister, Minister LeBlanc, and Minister Freeland have been in touch with all of the premiers. I don't have up to date, and I don't want that. There's no like extra information that I'm going to be able to provide you today. I do believe that it's been very well received, and I expect that there will be a lot of premiers that participate, but I can't tell you which ones or what stages they're at.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, sir. That's Terry Beech, Minister of Citizen Services. We appreciate it. Don Davies is the NDP finance critic, and he joins me now. Mr. Davies, welcome back to the show. It's good to see you.
Great to be with you, David.
So your leader today said the NDP fought for this, but also called it a Liberal letdown. Square that circle for me, Mr. Davies.
Well, first of all, to put it in context, we all know that Canadians are really struggling from coast to coast. Working families, middle-class families are skipping meals to feed their kids. We all know that people are having a shock price at the grocery stores, and people are struggling with their monthly bills. That's why last week, Jagmeet Singh announced a comprehensive GST reduction on a wide variety of life's essentials. So these are things, David, that people can't avoid. You know, things like your home heating, your monthly internet and cell bills, and then things like children's clothing and food and such. So we announced that we would take the GST off that permanently last week. Right. So the announcement today is the government obviously caving into that to some degree and agreeing to take the GST off a number of those things, not all of them, and temporarily. So while it will provide relief to a lot of people on a temporary basis, it doesn't go far enough, but we do want to make sure that the relief that it is presented in the announcement today goes to people, and we'll continue pressing for more.
Okay, so it doesn't cover the things you wanted on the monthly bills in terms of home heating costs and these sorts of things, which has been a persistent demand from the NDP. It does cover wine and beer. And look, I like a cold beer and a glass of wine as much as the next person, but are those essentials that need a tax holiday when it's the more fundamental day-to-day, life essentials that you talk about in terms of food and things and heat that are not getting any kind of relief in this?
Yeah, it's an interesting list of items that the Liberals want to take the GST off. And again, only for 60 days.
Yep.
We have to remember that, like, this is 2 months of relief, whereas the NDP was proposing permanent GST elimination on products. For us, it's about the life's essentials. It's about things like, again, your home heating bills. And of course, we're about to enter the winter season in many parts of the country. It's about the cellular and internet bills that really are now a staple of Canadian life. It's really not avoidable. And again, things like food and children's clothing are the things that we think are the types of purchases that Canadians really need relief on. You know, the fact that the Liberals have broadened it to include things like alcohol and restaurant meals for 60 days, I think will bring some relief. It's not what was in our proposal, but I think it will bring some relief to people, especially in the holiday season when people are getting together and they're celebrating things like cider and mulled wine and
Sure.
beer and liquor and stuff. You know, I'm not going to object to that for 2 months, but it's not the kind of life's essentials that we think ought to be getting relief from.
Well, January and February are notoriously difficult months for the restaurant sector too, so you can see how it would be a benefit there economically. But, when you look at this, it is across the board relief. And the criticism on consumption taxes being reduced like this is that it favors wealthier people with buying power, because the more you buy, the more you save. And what's happening with the other component of this policy, Mr. Davies, is a $250 check for every Canadian who makes $150,000 or less. Do you support that aspect of this? Because that is not targeted. $150,000 is a pretty good salary, even with the inflationary pressures of the last number of years. Do you support that idea as well?
Well, this is not something that we propose, and it's not an idea that's not what we would do if we were in government. But sending $250 to, say, people making $25,000 a year or $35,000 a year or $50,000 a year, I think will make a difference.
But why not increase what they get and lower the threshold to the $70,000? Like use your dental model, you know, for example, because that's the truly needy people in Canada right now. It seems political, like a Doug Ford type move to capture a larger number of voters by having the threshold at $150,000.
Yeah, well, you know, the NDP were the party of working people, and that benefit will go to about 18 million workers. You know, it's not something that we designed. We didn't negotiate it. We weren't asked about it. The threshold, you'll have to ask the Liberals why they chose the threshold they did. But what is important to the NDP is that this will send $250 to millions of Canadian workers who are making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. They're struggling paycheck to paycheck, unable to put food on the table for their kids and struggling to pay their rent and mortgage payments. So that's why we're going to support it, because we're not going to stand in the way of that just because the threshold may have been not done perfectly.
Okay, so this still has to get through the legislature, and as you well know, someone is there, just outside there right now. Nothing gets through the House of Commons these days because of the privilege motion that is happening. So you're prepared to pause the motion to get this through in a day. How would that even work, Mr. Davies? Like, would you need consent from the Conservatives? Do you just vote with the Liberals on that? Like, mechanically, how do you stop the privilege motion to get this on the table to pass through? Yeah,
well, what we've told the Liberals is that we will participate in a very surgical, brief lifting of the privilege motion to get this passed. We believe it's important to get relief out the door quickly for Canadians before Christmas. If this is done, then the GST relief will start on December 14th, and people can start getting the relief they need right away. We think that's important. So we're prepared to work with the government to do that, but only briefly. We think we can do it in one day. So we'll lift the privilege motion for one day, pass what's needed to pass in order to get this relief flowing to working people in this country, and then we'll go right back to debating the privilege motion, which, by the way, you know, we think the Liberals need to produce the documents. We've been very clear on that. There was millions of dollars of misspending at Sustainable Development Canada. There's, you know, really shocking stories of conflicts of interest and misspending. That Parliament does have a right to get the documents, and we're going to continue to press the Liberals to disclose those documents. So this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for the Liberals. This is a hall pass for one day. Okay, but let's just talk about that. I mean, the Conservatives may have different ideas, right? They may not want to go along with this to help you and the Liberals, who they say you're back, you know, in a coalition again, to use their phrase, not my phrase, to push us through. They may object to it. And on this privilege debate in and of itself, the documents you're seeking, correct me if I'm wrong, is to get them to immediately send them along to the RCMP, correct? And so that the RCMP can investigate it. But the Commissioner has said this is not how he wants to get the documents because it compromises the integrity of their investigation potentially. So why make this a hill to die on when the police force is kind of objecting to this method? Well, you'd have to ask the Conservatives that. I mean, they have preferred to tie up Parliament for 6 weeks where Parliament's been paralyzed, where we're not able to deal with the issues that Canadians want us and sent us here to deal with. Things like the climate crisis, the housing crisis, the opioid crisis, right. The affordability crisis. These are things Canadians want us to be dealing with. But you voted for the disclosure of these documents. All the opposition parties did, knowing the objections of the RCMP and the Auditor General and others. Why persist in allowing Parliament to be tied up? You could side with the Liberals to stop this. If the National Police Force is saying this is not the way we get evidence, we can't use this necessarily in a prosecution. Well, our position is simple, is tell the Liberal government to disclose the documents, and the issue goes away tomorrow. That's who is blocking this and causing this problem, the Liberals who refuse to disclose the documents. And on the one hand, the Conservatives, and by the way, the only coalition the NDP is in is with the working people of this country. That's our coalition. And you know, for the Conservatives to be blocking legislation in this House that will see real relief to people, hundreds of dollars of relief to Canadians who are struggling right now, I mean, that's the question I think Conservatives have to explain to Canadians. The NDP is going to continue to support any kind of measure that helps Canadians, and that's where our focus is, not on the political games the Conservatives are playing in the House of Commons. Right, and I want to reiterate, I never said you were in a coalition. That is the Conservative word. The coalition has a very specific meaning. Yeah. But look, one last question. You think you can get a pause to get this through? The supplementary estimates, the estimates need to be passed as well. And there's money in that for dental care. There's money in that for pharmacare, as I understand it. And these are programs you have personally worked very closely on as the former health critic for your party. Why not agree to a pause as well for the estimates? Because there are departments and programs that need the $21 billion or so in spending there that will also help
Canadians and can't proceed without this cash?
Well, we'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it, David, and I anticipate that will come up in the next few weeks. But again, we're going to take the same consistent lens that Jagmeet Singh and our party has done from the beginning, is we will always ask ourselves one question: is the matter before the House something that'll help working and middle-class Canadians or not? If it does, we'll support it. And if it doesn't, then we won't. But we are headed for that very issue that you identify in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully sanity will have returned to the House of Commons by then. The Liberals will have complied with the will of Parliament and disclosed documents. The Conservatives will end their games where they're putting their own partisan interests ahead of the interests of Canadians. But the NDP, we're laser focused on delivering for working middle-class Canadians, and that's the lens we're going to bring to every issue that comes before us until Christmas.
Don Davies, NDP finance critic, thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you, David.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says his party will support the legislation to make this possible, but to do that, they'll have to stop the debate currently grinding the House of Commons to a halt. So this gives us a lot to talk about with the Power Panel. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Cameron Ahmad is a former head of communications to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And here with me in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties, and Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. Good to see you all. I'm going to let you do most of the talking. As you can hear, my voice is probably going. But Jordan, Jagmeet Singh says the Liberals caved to his demands on this, even though it's not a permanent GST cut and it doesn't cover the monthly essentials that were at the heart of his plan. Is it really a cave, or is it something else?
Well, I think it's a pretty big win for the NDP, because it's clear that this wasn't on the Liberal government's radar until the NDP came forward a week back with this idea. So they had proposed taking the taxes off some additional items, including things like cell phone bills and other consumer things like that. But the idea of some sort of tax relief for consumers that are really being hit by the affordability crisis was put in the window, most recently by the NDP. And I think it's clear that they inspired what the Liberals were doing here. And they can now kind of claim this as another notch in their belt. And I think that it also shows that even though they left the confidence and supply agreement behind, they're still able to exact some concessions out of the government, even if it's a little bit more indirect. And I think that's a positive for them.
Okay, I was going to go to Cameron, but I see his screen has disappeared, so I'll go to Tim. Tim, I wonder, were they inspired by the NDP, or were they inspired by Erin O'Toole in the 2021 election, who promised a hold the tax for the holidays that the Liberals said was irresponsible because it would cost the government too much money?
I'm going to go with C, none of the above, and say they were inspired by what Shachi and I see all the time. The arse falling out of Liberal polling numbers. And look, you used to be able, David, where you and I are from, a bottle of rum used to do the trick. Now, apparently, you got to throw in diapers, beer,
Actually,
toys.
rum is not included.
Rum is actually not covered by
joking aside,
Yep.
It is a desperation move, but it may benefit some people. The question is, will it change Liberal polling numbers? And I think the challenge with that is that the messenger is a bit seen, very polarizing, long in the tooth, and not having connected previously on affordability. Will there be this moment where people run out and hug Justin Trudeau and say, thanks, man? And then what happens on February 16th? You know, when this thing ends.
Oh, when it goes back.
This thing ends, and then we go back.
Well, then you look forward to April 1 when you get your $250, right?
Yes, but my carbon price is going up after that. Look, I'll give Cam were there, and I would give him credit for this today. At least today, they're not talking about intrigue within their own party, cabinet ministers resigning, and it's an expensive way to get that off the front page, but that's what we're talking about today. So finally, for once, the Liberal Party driving an issue on a policy agenda.
Okay, you mentioned the numbers. I want to put up the latest numbers we got on the horse race from Abacus Data, just to show people the lay of the land. It doesn't factor in the $250 checks, obviously, and the HST holiday, but look at that. You have essentially the NDP and the Liberal ties at 21%. I think David Coletto said that's the first time in Abacus polling that you've seen that particular phenomenon. So, Shachi, I know that may be slightly different than what Angus Reid polling shows, but it's all basically showing the same thing, that Prime Minister Poilievre is coming, and we'll figure out who the opposition leader are when the votes are counted on election night. Does an affordability move like this, something they rejected in the past when Erin O'Toole pitched it, does it play? What do you think?
Well, the Liberals have tried being cute, they've tried being clever, they've tried to really focus on policy and the virtuosity of figuring out different ways to ensure that Canadians were being better taken care of on affordability. Look, we've come a long way from Disney Plus, and the notion that this was a government that is feeling and had been feeling the pain of Canadians in terms of affordability. You know, David, there's like a truthy versus reality aspect to all of this. And so, you know, on one hand, you've got Canadians feeling like things are really hard in terms of affordability, in terms of cost of living, and then there is the reality. In this case, it's actually both. Canadians are feeling it, but they're also expressing it in terms of the fact that you know, costs have still not come down. Consumer costs have still not come down to the extent that they were pre-pandemic, at a time when you know, people were not identifying things like groceries and housing and a night out as things that were just difficult for them. So look, they've tried everything. What else has the Prime Minister got to do? Does he have to come over and do your laundry? Does he have to come over and, like, you know, cook you a nice meal and pour you a glass of wine and rub your feet at the end of a night? Whatever he's got to do, this is now, I think Tim referred to it as desperation. Yeah, it's desperate, but it might actually be effective. I think we've seen incumbent governments all be taught a very cold lesson of late in returning to the basics. Look at what happened to the NDP in British Columbia. With a failure to be able to act on things like access to healthcare, affordability, housing, you know, the real basics. And so here you've got another experiment with the government saying, okay, we're not going to do a special targeted fund here. We're not going to do a special targeted investment there. Here's some money back. Here's some tax you don't have to pay. Please stop being mad at us. I think it's tough, but it could work, and it will be. People will notice it.
So, Cameron, you're back. Your internet has stabilized. So, the question I wanted to ask you very early is: you were part of the Liberal team in the 2021 campaign when Erin O'Toole pitched the holiday for the holidays on the GST, and the Liberal Party issued a statement. I don't know if it came from you, but they issued a statement saying this is too expensive for the government, and Erin O'Toole would have to pay for it by cutting childcare for Canadians. Do we have to cut childcare for Canadians now that the Liberals are doing this?
I hope not. I don't recall that particular statement, but I was going to bring up the fact that the Conservatives campaigned on this in 21, and it does put them in a tough spot today, saying that, you know, calling it a gimmick and suggesting they might not support it. I think it'll make them look pretty petty and a bit silly at a time when they're railing on about, rightly, talking about cost of living concerns, and we know that's the number one issue across pretty much all demographics across the country. I think it's a smart move from the government. It certainly won't solve all their problems, and economists will pick it apart.
They hate it.
It does mean that, of course, but it's a retail, tangible measure that is coming at a time when, as you've laid out, people have higher costs. They have to think about going out, buying gifts, saving, you know, for the holiday season with their families, and this will help. This will help lower income people. It'll also help to a smaller degree everyone in the country, or nearly 90% or 90+% of the country. So it's something that they can campaign on or talk about as they head into a campaign in the next few months or year. And it makes as Tim pointed out, it changes the conversation from this chaotic stalemate in Parliament, which people I don't think really understand or care much for at a time when they have real concerns like kitchen table concerns, and it changes the channel, and it puts the focus on affordability with something real that they're doing.
Right, but Jordan, it's a $6 billion channel changer, if you want to call it that, right? In terms of about 1.5, 1.6 for the HST holiday, and then the checks are going to cost another $4 billion. That's not nothing, and they had promised a $40 billion deficit. There were already warnings from the PBO. They've blown through that. This would blow through it even further. I mean, you know, at what point, I mean, maybe fiscal tracks don't matter anymore, but they sure did on Budget Day when they were a key part of the speech.
Well, I think there's no atheists in a foxhole. I think that it's so clear that the Liberals needed to do something to change the channel, yes, but also to shift it back onto issues that are salient with the Canadian public. And that's affordability. That's how people are feeling stretched and can't make their monthly bills. And so is it expensive? Yes, but the cost of doing nothing is to risk the continuation and maybe even the deepening of this 20-point lead that you're seeing from the Conservatives. So from that sense, I think they don't have a lot to lose in trying this. It is late for them to come to the affordability message, and I think that the Prime Minister, as the main spokesperson on this, doesn't have a lot of credibility with Canadians on that issue, but it's something that they have to try. And this type of economic populism, I think this is very much a lesson that they've taken from the US election. This was the type of thing that you saw that was very popular. Trump even put forward some policies that were similar to this, right? So I think that they're looking at some of those lessons globally, and they're looking at the need to really connect with voters on an issue that they haven't been able to break through on.
Yeah, two separate points. The $250 check, which is separate, which is going to cost, I think, $5 million, goes to 18 million people or thereabouts. They're giving that to people who have net income of $150,000. That would suggest that their gross is getting pretty close to $300,000. Now they're likely that I think that.
No, I don't know if that means after tax. I think it means after your deductions, like RRSPs and things like that. But still, $150,000 is high,
yeah,
right?
Which would suggest, obviously, this is a play specifically, I think, to a lot of the Gen Z and millennial voters that have helped Justin Trudeau in the past, who don't think he is with them now on affordability measures. I don't know that alone will work, but as Shachi says, we'll see where all of this goes. The other thing are, what are the unintended consequences? And I'll give you a very quick example of that. And maybe consumers don't care about these, but business do. I sell beer. I don't have any here tonight, but I give you the December 14th discount now, David Cochran. I know our retail space and other retailers are like, all right, what do we got to do to change all of this?
So you got to reprogram things twice.
You got to reprogram things. You got to change all of that. It's not insignificant.
Now, the CFIB has issued a statement making this very point.
And also, does it change buying patterns? So what happens over the next 2 or 3 weeks, right? Do you lose continuous sales over that period of time? So, they may not sound like big consequences, but they do have impacts on business. It will be fascinating, though, to see if it does move the numbers, because it's really hard to believe, and Cam, to be fair to him, did say they'll require other things, but the messenger here has been so ineffective in getting messages across because of the views people share on him or have about him right now. I don't think this is enough of a channel changer, because Canadians will be happy to take a break and go for it. And on February 15th, Justin Trudeau will still be whatever phrase you want to use to describe him in an unpopular way to them. They're going to take the break, but are you going to get the political reward?
So, Shachi, just a final point on this topic. I mean, it's very similar to what Doug Ford did with the $200 check that's going out to everyone in Ontario, though his is uncapped. It goes to absolutely everybody. This is capped at $150,000, but that is still a high salary.
Net.
And I hear you. but that is still a high salary. And is that bad program design because it's not targeted at lower income, or is it a recognition that everything they've kind of focused on has really focused at the most vulnerable Canadians, and the middle of the country that is losing ground has really gotten no help from this government? Because I know there are childcare and Canada Child Benefit, but the specific stresses of inflation has targeted the lowest income Canadians, not that middle part of the country.
This is a government that has focused over the last 9 years on really specific targeted programs. We're going to do this for these folks. We're going to do that for those folks. We're going to look at those people there. And, the impact of that ultimately is, where's my relief? Where's my lolly? Where's my rebate check? Why don't I get nice things too? There are a lot of voters, particularly those at a higher income level, people who, interestingly and somewhat paradoxically, also are more likely to point to issues such as deficit spending and government spending overall as key issues for them, but who have in the past voted for the Liberals who have migrated over to the Conservatives. And I think this is very much a play around getting some of those households back who feel like, look, I'm paying a higher level of tax. I am being inundated with messaging across every single communications platform by the leader of the opposition saying, your lot is worse because Trudeau is taxing the hell out of you. And here's an opportunity for the Liberals to, again, not just try and change the conversation, but to try and put some money back in wallets. Now, what we haven't talked about, well, we did a little bit, is that overall cost. But for now, I think today, this is a bit of a winner because Pierre Poilievre is not going to be able to turn around and say this is a terrible idea when he's basically been wailing on the government for this reason. And, who's to say February 16th doesn't come around and they drop the writs and say, let's have a referendum on this particular issue. Do you want this or not? Maybe terrible economic policy, but has the potential to be very popular in an era of populist politics.
I think the April 1 check date may give us a clear sign of when the election would be. That's just a guess. Cameron, last 20 seconds to you because we lost you there earlier.
Quickly, it's not that they've been late to the affordability topic. They've, as you've pointed out, have had so many different policies that have actually helped millions of Canadians, particularly lower income families, people with kids, and seniors. Dental care, Canada Child Benefit, child care cost cutting, being cut massively. It's just that it hasn't broken through. And this is a policy that is much broader. It's temporary. It's fairly small, but people will notice it and it will make a difference over the holidays.